You already know someone you're about to lose. Maybe you haven't admitted it to yourself yet, but if you think back over the past few weeks, there's probably somebody on your team who's shifted. They're a little quieter, a little slower. They're still doing the work, technically, but they're not really there anymore. And here's the part that's going to sting a little. By the time they schedule a meeting and hand you their resignation, you will have already missed your best window to change the outcome. Today, we're going to talk about exactly when that window opens, what to do before it closes, and why the leaders who crack this don't do anything complicated. They just do something that most managers stopped doing a long time ago. Stay with me for a little bit and we'll dive right in. Let me start with a number because I want to ground this in reality before we get into the human side. SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management, estimates that replacing one employee costs an organization between 6 to 9 months of that person's salary. For a middle line manager earning roughly 60 grand a year, you're looking at up to $45,000. That's just the visible cost in recruiting fees, interview time, onboarding ramp up, and lost productivity during the gap. But the invisible costs are worse. Institutional knowledge out the door, client relationships out the door, team morale out the door, trust and collaboration that takes years to build and weeks to walk out the door. Now, multiply that by the 3 or 4 people that most mid-sized organizations lose in a given year. You're looking at a quiet, compounding drain that rarely appears anywhere on a budget, but it affects everything. I want to put a face on those numbers because data alone doesn't change behavior. Stories do. A couple, 3, 4 years ago, I watched a close friend of mine go through something that I think many leaders in this audience will recognize. And in the interest of anonymity, we'll just call him Marcus. Marcus was running a department of about 12 people at a regional financial services firm. He was smart, hardworking, genuinely a decent guy. By every external measure, he was doing well. And then in the span of about 8 months, he lost 4 of his top 6 performers. 4 out of 6, 2/3. Each time he was blindsided. Each time the exit interview produced the same variation on the same theme. I just need a new challenge. Or I received an offer that I couldn't refuse. And each time Marcus left that conversation feeling like something had gone wrong that he just couldn't quite name. After the 4th departure, his own manager sat him down. And she said something that Marcus told me that he's just never forgotten. The line she said was, "Marcus, you're not losing people to other companies. You're losing them to the experience of not being led well enough to stay." That line there hit him like a truck, not because it was unfair, but because it was accurate. Marcus wasn't a bad manager. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't neglectful. He was decent. But it turns out that being decent isn't enough to retain people who have options. And increasingly, everyone has options. Here's something that I want to challenge because I think it's at the root of most failed retention efforts. When turnover becomes a visible problem in an organization, the response almost always looks the same. You survey the employees and find out what they want, and then you just give them more of it. And in almost every single one of those surveys, what do employees say they want? Answers all cluster around the same things. They want better pay, more flexibility, clearer career paths, and more recognition. 4 things. So the organization responds. Salaries get a little bump. A flexible work policy gets drafted and implemented. A recognition program gets launched. And a tuition reimbursement fund gets set up that exactly nobody uses. And then for the next 4, 5, 6 months, the numbers look better. Turnover slows down. Leadership takes a minute to breathe. And then 12 months later, the same kinds of people are leaving all over again. The reason this cycle keeps repeating is that surveys are good at capturing what people say that they want, but they're terrible at capturing why people actually disengage. So here's what the data actually says. Gallup, the poll people, have been tracking workplace engagement for decades. Their research consistently finds that managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement. Not the company, not the mission, not the perks, not the bennies, the manager. Now, the thing about the manager is that's a controlling variable. It means that no matter how thoughtful the benefits package is, no matter how flexible the schedule, no matter how inspiring the all hands speeches are, if the manager relationship isn't working, engagement suffers and retention follows. I want to say that again, but slightly differently because I want it to land properly. If in your current role, you manage people, you are the retention strategy, period. Not HR, not the compensation philosophy, not the company culture deck. You. Now, when you stop and let that sink in, that's a lot of responsibility. It's also a lot of opportunity because it means the outcome is largely in your hands. Before we get into what to do about this, I want to give you something immediately practical because one of the biggest gaps that I see in how leaders handle retention is timing. The window to retain somebody who has already decided to leave is incredibly small. Once they've accepted an offer elsewhere, the conversation is essentially already over. But the decision to start looking rarely happens overnight. It builds and it builds. And if you know what to look for, you can see it building. So here are 5 warning signs, and I generally encourage you to think about the folks on your team right now as I go through this list. Warning sign number 1 is the shift from contribution to compliance. Think about your best performers, the ones who used to raise their hand and propose ideas, sometimes push back constructively, and own outcomes that were well beyond their job description. When someone moves from that kind of active contribution to just doing exactly what is asked for and nothing more, that right there is a signal. It's a signal that they've stopped investing in outcomes that they no longer believe will change. The energy they use to make things better is being conserved. Sign number 2 is decreased visibility and presence. They're skipping the optional meetings. The camera is off on almost all video calls. Responses take longer to come through. Physical and digital presence is just a proxy for investment. When it drops noticeably, that's worth paying attention to. And warning sign number 3 is a shift in language. This one is subtle, but it's real. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Highly engaged employees use ownership language. Things like, we're building this, or here's what I think we should try, or I want to make sure that this works. Disengaged employees shift to distance language. Things like, well, they asked me to do this, or the company or so-and-so wants X, Y, or Z, or I'm just waiting to hear back. When the language moves from personal ownership to just detached observation, the emotional exit has already begun. Warning sign number 4 is an unusual interest in external opportunities. These folks all of a sudden become more active on LinkedIn or Glassdoor. They start asking about external conferences or courses beyond what they may have used to. They mention other companies or roles in conversations when they never used to. And none of this is automatically a sign that they're leaving, but it is a sign that they're thinking about their professional trajectory in ways that may just not feel supported where they are right now. And warning sign number 5. This is the hardest one to articulate, and it's the easiest to feel. It's the energy drop. You just know when someone who used to bring energy to the room has just stopped. Their work is still technically correct, but it lacks the care that it once had. The spark is gone. You notice it even if you can't quite explain what changed. So if you start to see 2 or 3 of those in the same person at the same time, don't wait for the exit interview. Have that conversation now. I know that feels uncomfortable, and I know it might seem like you're creating something out of nothing, but here's the cost benefit. A slightly awkward conversation where you say something like, "Hey, I've noticed something has shifted for you lately, and I just want to check in," is indefinitely less costly to the company or the organization than the conversation where they hand you a letter and their 2-week notice. Here's another something worth sitting with, because I think it's at the root of a lot of preventable turnover. Most managers and leaders out there, they see the warning signs. They recognize them in the moment, even if they don't always label them clearly, but they have a gut feeling that something is just off with one of the members on their team. And then they don't act on it. So the next logical question is why? And I'll give you 4 reasons because I've heard every single one of them. Number 1 is they're waiting for certainty. They don't want to have a conversation about something that might just be a bad week or a bad mood. They don't want to create drama where there isn't any. So they just watch and they wait and they wait and watch and wait and watch. And by the time that they're certain, it's just too late. The second excuse, well, they're just hoping that it's going to resolve by itself. This is the leadership equivalent of ignoring that strange noise in your car. 9 times out of 10, it doesn't fix itself. It gets worse, and the bill with the mechanic is so much more. Reason or excuse number 3 is they just don't know what to say. Nobody teaches you how to have a, "Well, you seem less engaged. What's going on?" type conversation. It's awkward, it's clunky, and it feels like an overreach. So a lot of leaders just tend to avoid it altogether. And reason or excuse number 4 is they're just afraid of the answer. If someone tells them that they're unhappy, now there's a problem to solve. And solving it might require difficult and different conversations or resource changes or feedback that goes in both directions. Avoidance just feels safer right up until it costs you a team member. I do want to name something important here. None of those responses that I called excuses or reasons are character flaws. This isn't a dig on the manager. Those are deeply human reactions to interpersonal uncertainty. But the cost of those reactions at scale is enormous. The leaders who change this pattern don't suddenly become fearless. They make a decision. They decide that the discomfort of the proactive conversation is smaller than the cost of an avoidable departure. Once that calculation is clear, the behavior changes. So let's get to the part that actually changes things. There are 5 behaviors that consistently separate the leaders whose best people stay from the leaders whose best people train their competitors. None of these is complicated. None of them is expensive, but they all require time and intentionality. And both of those are choices. So behavior number 1 is to check in before there's a crisis. The standard one-on-one meeting in most organizations is nothing more than a glorified project update. The leader runs through the list and the team member reports on the status of this, that, and the other, and everyone leaves feeling like something useful just happened. And it did. It's just not the thing that builds retention. High retention leaders use their one on one time to ask different questions, not just how's the project going, but they ask, hey, how are you doing generally? Not just an are you on track with the whatever file, but hey, what's engaging you and energizing you right now? Or what's frustrating you? What's getting in your way that I could help remove? Now, I'm not saying turn your one on ones into therapy sessions. They're 5 minutes inside of a conversation that you're already having. But those 5 minutes build a fundamentally different relationship, one where people feel safe enough to bring you problems before they become decisions. The goal isn't to become your team member's best friend or emotional support dog. It's to become someone that they trust with honest information, because honest information is how you solve problems before they cost you your people. Behavior number 2 is to invest in growth before people ask. This is the habit that changes retention outcomes more than almost anything else. Proactively managing the growth of the people on your team without waiting to be asked. This means knowing where each person is on their journey and where they want to go professionally, not just what they're good at right now, but what they're building toward or what they want to be when they grow up. It means creating opportunities that support their development while aligning with your operational and organizational needs. It means saying out loud to a person on your team, I see where you want to be. And here's how I'm going to help you get there if you'd like my help. To illustrate that point, I want to tell you about something that I watched happen at a company that I worked with a few years back. There was a designer on their team who was genuinely exceptional at her work. We'll just call her Paula. And her manager recognized her talent and made sure that she was always on the highest visibility projects with the most opportunity. What the manager missed was that Paula didn't just want to be a great designer from now until the end of forever. She wanted to lead a team. So for 18 months, a year and a half, nobody asked. Nobody created a path. The manager always appreciated what she produced without connecting it to what she wanted to become. Every quarter was a performance conversation about her work, not a conversation about her future. So fast forward a little bit, and Paula left for a startup where she lead a team of 4. It was a smaller company, lower pay, considerably more uncertainty, but she could see growth there. She couldn't see it where she was. So the manager in that case was genuinely gutted when Paula walked out the door. He'd done everything technically right, but he missed the one thing that would have changed the outcome for the better. The moral to that story is ask the question, build the path, and invest in people's futures deliberately, not by accident. Behavior number 3 is to have those hard conversations early. Retention is not only about keeping happy people happy, it's about addressing unhappy people before the unhappiness becomes a decision. Most managers avoid those hard conversations like the plague, not out of malice, but out of just discomfort. It feels easier to let things be slightly awkward than to sit across from someone and say, hey, I've noticed your energy has changed lately, and I want to understand what's going on for you and fix it if I can. But here's what that avoidance costs over time. The gap between what's actually happening and what's being discussed grows wider. Resentments solidify and misunderstandings compound. By the time someone hands you their resignation, there's often a list of things that could have been addressed or, at a minimum, understood months earlier. Hands down, the most powerful retention conversation is the one that feels unnecessary, the one you have before there's an obvious reason to have it. The one where you say, hey, I don't know if anything is wrong, but I care enough to ask. That conversation changes relationships, and changed relationships changed outcomes. Behavior number 4 is to build psychological safety. And we touch on this almost every week. In 2012, Google launched an internal research project called Project Aristotle. The question was simple in concept: what actually makes a team perform at the highest level? And Google, with their massive tech budget, had every single data point imaginable: individual intelligence scores, and personality profiles, and team tenure, and communication patterns, and work styles, and a whole bunch of other things. And they looked at every single metric they could come up with. The answer surprised them. The single biggest predictor of a team's effectiveness was not the combination of individual talent. It was not the mission's clarity. It was psychological safety, which their research defined as the shared belief that the team as a whole is safe enough to take interpersonal risks. Put it in plain language: people perform their best when they believe that they can speak up and make mistakes, or ask questions, or disagree without being punished for it. The leaders who build this environment don't just get better retention. They get better ideas, better decisions, better problem solving, all from the same group of people. And here's the hard truth about psychological safety: you either create it or you erode it, mostly through how you respond to very small moments. When someone raises a concern, do you engage it seriously or do you just minimize it? When someone makes a mistake, do you respond with curiosity or do you respond with punishment? When someone pushes back on your idea in a meeting, do you genuinely consider their argument and ask probing questions, or signal that disagreement isn't welcome here? These moments feel inconsequential in isolation, but they accumulate into the environment that you're building. And that environment is either a reason to stay or a reason to look for somewhere safer. Behavior number 5 is to recognize people in the ways that actually matter to them. Recognition is one of the most studied drivers of employee engagement and one of the most misapplied tools in leadership out there today. The default approach in most organizations is public praise, a shout out in the team meeting, or a mention during the all hands call, a "hey, great job on that project" email reply. Now, for some folks, that's genuinely meaningful, but for others, public recognition is uncomfortable. And for others, it's nice, but it doesn't actually register as appreciation in the ways that drive commitment. And then for others, it can be almost condescending. The mistake isn't trying to recognize people at all. The mistake is assuming that what motivates you motivates everyone else on your team. So you've got to chop this up into a couple different buckets. Some people want to be recognized publicly. Some want specific private feedback that tells them exactly what they did well and why it mattered. And some folks experience recognition through autonomy and trust. When you give them a high visibility project with genuine ownership, that right there is the signal. Some folks want to see a path forward as a form of recognition. Hey, because of the work you've done, here's where I see you going next. The way that you figure out which of those or something else applies to each person on your team is not complicated. It's not rocket science or brain surgery. You simply ask the question: hey, what kind of recognition actually means something to you? That's the question. That's it. It takes 30 seconds to ask the question, but it changes the quality of the relationship between you and your team member for years. So I do want to stop and zoom out for a minute before we wrap this up. Employee retention is not, at its core, a tactics problem. Now, I know I've just given you 5 specific behaviors and a checklist to do them, and I believe that all 5 of them have their place. But the leaders who build exceptional retention over the long term aren't just running better one-on-one meetings. They've shifted how they think about what leadership actually is. Leadership is not resource management. It's not optimization. It's not extracting the highest output per head count. Leadership is creating an environment where people can do their best work. They can grow toward their full potential and they feel genuinely connected to what they're building. When you lead from that orientation, retention is just a byproduct. You're not doing retention-y things. You're doing leadership things, and the people around you will feel the difference. I want to leave you with one question. I ask this of every leader that I work with, and I want you to sit with it honestly for a second. If your three best people got a call from a recruiter today, how confident are you genuinely that they'd turn it down? And not turn it down because of the market, not because changing jobs is logistically hard, but because of the experience of working for you is something worth protecting. If you can answer that question with full confidence, you're doing the work. But if there is even a flicker of doubt, that flicker is information. It's telling you something. So act on it. So to wrap this all up in a nice pink fuzzy bow, here's what I want you to take from today. Your best people are not leaving because someone else offered better snacks in the break room or a shinier office. They're leaving because somewhere along the way, the experience of working for you stopped being worth staying for. And in most cases, that gap opened long before their resignation letter ever arrived. The good news is you can close this gap, not with programs or policies or perks, but with attention, with honesty, with investment, and the willingness to have the conversations that you've just been avoiding. Now, all of this is hard. It's not technically hard, but it's emotionally hard. It requires you to be a little curious when it's easier to just be busy. It requires you to be honest when it's more comfortable to be vague. It requires you to care about where your people are going, not just what they're delivering today. The leaders who do this work, do it well, do it consistently, imperfectly, over time, build teams that other organizations simply can't recruit away. They build cultures of trust that compound on each other. They build a reputation that draws exactly the kind of people that they want. And that is something worth building. If today's episode gave you something useful, please share it with a leader in your world, not just for my numbers, but because this conversation needs to be happening in more organizations than it currently is. You can find everything at toby-talks.com. More episodes, more frameworks, more of the practical stuff that actually changes how you lead. So until next time, I'm Toby Hoy. This was Toby Talks, and lead well.